From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Dan O'Brien awaits to look at all the speculation over the potential soybean sales to China in the wake of the newly signed trade deal. Dan discussed that at length at K-State's recent Soybean Production Schools, and it's part of his weekly segment on the grain market trends. Then, K-State's Lucas Haag will review some of the exciting new developments in the agricultural technology arena, as were highlighted at the 2020 Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference last week, co-sponsored by K-State. Among those, sensor systems on combines for sorting wheat by protein level. And later, K-State's Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather, here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Welcome once again, and thanks for joining us. The grain market's up for a look now, with Dan O'Brien on board with us from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. As you know, Dan is K-State Research and Extension's grain market economist, and in fact, Dan, you have had a speaking part at those K-State soybean schools around and about Kansas recently, talking markets, and just want to ask you right out, what seemed to be the topics of interest among growers who attended these?
Well, a lot of concern about when Chinese buying of grain, of soybeans in particular, other grains as well, would come into the market and help to support prices. For most folks, after the Phase 1 trade deal was signed about a week ago, concern about the caution and downtrend in the soybean futures markets, again, down about 30 cents or so, that had occurred, and wondering about how the structure of this trade deal in the long run would eventually work out, and really optimism that all that would help, but wondering about the timing of it. And I think that question about the timing of when purchases might come was on the minds of not just Kansas farmers, but almost anybody in the U.S. watching those markets.
The thing is, though, Dan, as uncertain as these potential Chinese soybean sales are in this country, grain buyers in China, according to this recent report, are as foggy about all of this as we are here.
Yes, it seems that the Chinese government has yet to clearly define to both the state trading agencies and also to the independent buyers just how the purchases of soybeans and these other crops will work out. Again, they're dealing with tariff rate quotas, with still some existing tariffs that are in place on the Chinese side, that in particular at the U.S., that if Chinese buyers are going to have the opportunity to buy in quantities and in the dollar amounts, as is talked about, there'll have to be some way around their tariffs that they have in place. So a lot of issues to be dealt with. It seems that respected market analysts have talked about how if China is to achieve the quantity of purchases that have been discussed, that it won't just be an easily accepted and digested amount of grain that will have to be handled. And in fact, there'll be a strong increase, and it will shift their flow of grain probably from some other countries. And of course, the other people that sell soybeans and crops to China, they'll be really sensitive to all of that as well. So a lot of things to work out. It's really easy to just kind of scratch your head and wonder how this is going to play out. And apparently, we're doing that on our side of the ocean, and even the buyers in China are waiting for some guidance yet to see how all that will work out.
And just as a footnote there, in as far as those tariff rate quotas, there was a statement in that article quoting a Chinese official on it potentially being easier for feed grain companies to purchase things other than soybeans, namely DDGs and sorghum.
Yes, it'd be interesting to talk to the sorghum industry folks and see how they interpret this. One thing about it, if Kansas sorghum and the U.S. sorghum market overall can regain some strength in terms of export usage, it'll certainly be supportive of that crop and of their prices and probably planting prospects out off here into 2020.
Well, the trade talk is starting to build with more momentum towards spring planted acreage, and the projections on how much U.S. corn will be planted, soybeans, grain, sorghum a little later on, but especially the battle for acres between corn and beans. And what's the latest thinking on that the trade has embraced?
Well, in terms of projected acreage increases, I think that we'll be looking at an effort to get back to normal, to try to plant the acres that we didn't plant last year or that were prevented planted. And in 2018, we planted 89 million acres of soybeans. The official number in 2019 was 76. I'm still unclear exactly where this shifted 4 million acres that was probably going to be planted to soybeans but was claimed as prevented planted for corn, where that plays into that. But be that as it may, I guess there's anticipation of about 8 million more acres being talked about to be planted in the U.S. in the coming year. And with that, 8 million more acres, if you go off to 76 million, that's the official number, well, gosh, you'd be up to 84 million. That would put you up to levels of about 2015, 2016. In 17, 18, we did get up to 90 and 89. So either way, we're looking for some type of a strong response or a response back to normal on acres that couldn't be planted this last year. And with that, if we have trendline yields on that, no crop loss, then it does throw us out there into the, considerations for fall 2020 and raises the question of how a large crop would be absorbed by the market. If we do get a large crop again, back to say 4.5 billion or 4.4 instead of the 3.5 we had this year, then the U.S. market will really need strong Chinese exports to come in and help to keep us from accumulating large stockpiles and having prices to the low side. It is interesting when you look at forward contract bids on the one hand and what the options markets are doing on the other out there into November. We have forward contract bids where we had our most recent soybean meeting up in north central Kansas area, northeast north central. Marysville was the last location we'd met at on Wednesday. And forward contract bids in that area have running around for fall harvest 840, 860 in some areas, depending if you're at a shuttle loader or more of a country elevator location. Our cost of production numbers for north central Kansas at 40, 41 to 45 bushels per acre, closer to 750, 775. So we've got some forward contract bids that are covering basically our full cost, our full economic cost, including land. But again, we're just a good long way from anything being planted. If you look out to the options market for November soybeans, and you wonder, well, what are put option buyers who are really trying to manage their downside price risk? If you try to see where they put their money at, well, the largest volume of purchases in the options market, put options market, is at about $8. So you know what? I guess that makes sense in that if someone is fearful of what the downside in the soybean market could be at into November of next year, and just again, to protect themselves from that bad financial outcome, they're probably looking at something below $8 for an area of protection. On the upper side, if you're looking at calls and wonder, well, where are people that are buying soybeans going to have their price protection at? There's a lot of that at $10.50, $10.60. So there you go. In a way, we're kind of bounding the market. Worries below $8 for next fall on the downside. If you're a buyer wondering about something at $10.50, $10.60 is as high as you'd like to see things go on the futures. If again you're needing to buy that crop and run it through a processor sometime. So
there are sure things to an extent in those forward contracts to at least take some of the risk out. On the other hand, there are reasons out there that aren't fully locked down, but reasons nonetheless to be rather optimistic about improved prices, Dan.
Well, yes, and that the market is seeing a fair amount of volume at 1050, 1060, et cetera, means that, either through short crop or strong exports, we could see that. And so now where are we sitting? We're sitting at about 940 or 950, somewhere in between. So the market is looking out there at its possibilities and trying to protect either way.
All right. Well, Dan has included a great deal of what we've talked about today in his weekly notes on the grain markets, and quite a bit on soybeans, of course, coming off of those soybean schools that K-State hosted. You'll find those notes at agmanager.info. And Dan, as always, a good weekend to you. Many thanks.
Thanks, sir. Take care.
K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien along with us each Friday right here. And in that we reference those K-State soybean schools that have just wrapped up. Might go ahead and take this opportunity to remind you corn producers that K-State's series of corn management schools will continue the week after next at 3 locations well scattered around the state. These will again cover a number of issues you corn producers are contending with in each region: farm bill options, weed control, insect resistance, crop fertility management, disease management, late planting considerations, and so on. Great programs, each and every one of them. There'll be a corn management school in Oakley on Monday, February the 3rd, then Wednesday the 5th of February in Salina. Lastly, the series rounds out on Friday, February the 7th in Olathe. Each school running from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and lunch is provided. Please pre-register as soon as possible. You can do so online at kscorn.com/cornschool, kscorn.com/cornschool, or call the host Research and Extension office in each of those locations. Again, February 3rd in Oakley, February 5th in Salina, and February 7th in Olathe. And we'll return in a moment to take a look at some of the topics of discussion at another K-State conference just this past week. The onus there on agricultural technology advances. That's next here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Welcome back to Agriculture Today. This time last week, the 2020 Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference was wrapping up just down the road in Junction City, a program co-sponsored, as always, by K-State Research and Extension. And it's a whirlwind of information that comes out of this conference every year, germane to the advances in agricultural technology. We've invited via phone now, Lucas Haag. Lucas, as you know, is a Research and Extension crop production specialist for K-State, based in Northwest Kansas, and he's very much involved in this conference and the planning and the proceedings as well. And one would suppose that you had another successful gathering at the conference.
Yeah, we sure did, Eric. You know, this is our 23rd year of it. And so the really cool thing about that is we've really developed a reputation as a very unique conference in terms of both the crowd that we draw into it as well as the speakers we're able to get to come in and visit with us. You know, it's a really unique audience. We got, producers, I'd argue some of the more innovative producers in the state in there, as well as consultants and retailers and, of course, some research and extension folks as well. So it's really a fun group of folks to get together and discuss and think about both current ag technology and how do we make it pay, as well as kind of some far-out discussion in terms of where's this thing going.
And we must acknowledge the co-sponsor, which is the Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association, comprised largely of agricultural producers conducting research on their premises. So when you look at the agenda, it was full, once again, with topical information. But it started by looking at a subject that persists, and that is managing and using all of that data gathered. There was a dialogue there, Lucas?
Yeah, so I mean that was really, and we always try and start the conference off with some hands-on practitioners that are actually putting this stuff to work and using it to manage their operations. And so we had Matt Splitter and Lee and Margaret Scheifler, they large farm operators there in south central Kansas. And Lee, of course, is a founding member of CARTA and very early adopters of technology. And Matt is a younger operator and basically, just they stepped us through how they have streamlined the data collection process on their farm, how they're getting that data to flow and transfer that into something they can use to make farm decisions with almost in real time. And so it was a really great presentation. They're using a lot of open source tools, things like Google Forms, Google Docs, free software that they've customized, and it was, I think, really valuable for people to actually see on a working farm how these tools can be utilized, not just in the traditional precision ag sense of variable rate fertility or variable rate seeding, but they're using it to manage grain inventories, manage the logistics of sprayers and trucks and where stuff needs to be, and so it really was a great way to kick off the conference.
And so the message there is that there are tools out there to help streamline that data and maximize its utility then.
Yeah, I think the bigger message is, and a lot of, I've experienced this in our own family operation, and a lot of producers would agree, the biggest challenge is you got to make it painless for that data to be collected. For the guy that's sitting in the sprayer or in the truck, or you've got to make it painless to collect that data at that point in time and get it into a form that can be used quickly. And so that's really a large part of their focus was how do you make it as painless as possible and how do you convert it into something useful as quickly as possible?
Well, one of the next plateaus in this area, it would seem anyway, how artificial intelligence might be employed on the farm or ranch at a high level of technology. And that was part of the program as well, was it not?
Yes, we were really fortunate to get Andrew Nelson, and he's a really unique speaker because he operates a dryland wheat farm up in the Pacific Northwest in the Palouse region, and he's also a software engineer for Microsoft. And so really brings a unique perspective to the table. And so he's involved with their Farm Beats program. And the reason we brought him in is, artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's all these buzzwords that we're hearing that kind of, glaze our eyes over, arguably overused words. But he came in and gave us some real-world examples. One of the examples he gave was, for example, applying a selective grass herbicide in wheat, and how they were able to take drone imagery or satellite imagery and basically you train the AI system. You point and click at places in the field and say, okay, this is grass, this is weedy grass, this is wheat, this is weedy grass, this is wheat. And you do that enough times and then eventually the system learns and generates a variable rate prescription for applying that selective grass herbicide. So it was nice to see some real-world examples of these buzzwords that we hear and how they could actually be used in ag.
Did you get a sense of the practicality of these advanced systems then, affordability, the payback, and so forth?
Yeah, so a lot of what he was showing us is I think he used the terminology is basically in the pre-release stage, and so, and obviously I'm sure eventually there'll be, some fee per acre assessed as part of this for using these tools, but, a great deal of what he showed us was what I would consider to be very near in terms of market ready.
What else captured your attention in as far as cutting-edge technologies that are coming on board here, if they're not here already? Anything in particular?
So we did have Craig Rupp with Sabano Ag. They're running an autonomous tractor and doing their business model is going to be doing planning for hire, custom farming for hire using autonomous equipment. That was our Thursday evening discussion, which always results in a lot of conversation, and so that was really good. And then I think, tying into some more current issues here in Kansas, we've had a lot of discussion the last couple of years. Eric, I think you and I visited on this program about managing wheat for protein. Mm-hmm. And so that's got a lot of people's interest. And so we had a pair of speakers there, both a farmer from southwest Kansas, Steve Arnold, who's using some of this technology on his combine, as well as someone from industry who's building these protein sensors that can go right on the combine and then let you segregate your grain, at harvest by truckload or by grain cart load or whatever, segregate the grain at harvest based on protein. And so that spurred a lot of good conversation around that technology and how we could, maybe bring a little more profitability back into the wheat industry.
And depending on the year, if protein premiums are being paid at a substantial level, that's a technology that could reap the rewards, if you will, in an efficient way.
Yeah, for this sensor, I think they were talking, somewhere in the neighborhood of $17,000 to $20,000 for the sensor to go on the machine. And so you start to thinking about that. These years where protein premiums are available, especially if you got access to your own on-farm storage to do some direct marketing, the return on investment on a unit like that's not far-fetched. I think there's a pretty strong business case to be made.
Of course, with this conference, a large share of the value is in the off-program interactions, the networking and the hallway conversations and so forth. So what do you think was the lead point of discussion informally amongst the attendees?
Really the first presentation we had, I think, generated a lot of discussion amongst attendees in terms of, seeking out from each other. Hey, how are you managing this data? What's useful? What tools are you using? Are you still moving stuff around on flash drives, or are you relying on cloud providers? I think that's just it. It really generated a lot of discussion in terms of people thinking about what are some simple steps I can take to generate some economic return out of this technology.
And that is an ongoing dialogue, it seems, year upon year, Lucas, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's largely the focus is, we've made significant investments in technology across our farms. I think sometimes we're not always sure that we're generating a real strong economic return on those. And we also have, we can talk about there's some short-term economic returns as well as some long-term economic returns. And I think we try and encompass both of those topics at the conference when we're discussing this.
Well, again, this was the 23rd Annual Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, and it was the inspiration, those 23 years back, on the part of K-State Research and Extension and the Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association. And saying that because for those who are not part of the CARTA experience, if you will, there is plenty of room for new participants there, right?
Absolutely, Eric. That's really... this organization has evolved and continues to evolve over the years, but really the foundation of it has been is trying to join together like-minded producers who have an interest in adopting and maximizing the use of technology on the farm. And then also you mentioned earlier, an important part of this is the on-farm research component. Early on, the members of CARTA recognized, hey, with things like at first yield monitors and later on auto steer, it's really opened up the opportunity to do meaningful on-farm research trials. And so that's part of the mission of CARTA through our grant program, through providing assistance through K-State Research and Extension. We really want to shepherd that activity and help people do those on-farm trials to answer their own questions under their own management, and yet do it in a way that is providing them some data that they can have confidence in.
It's an initiative that has really paid off over a couple of decades plus. If you'd like to know more about the association proper, go to this web address, kartaonline.org. That's kartaonline.org. And by the sound of it, another successful conference. So congratulations, Lucas, to you and all of the planners for pulling it off. It's always good to hear what was on producers' minds at this major event. Appreciate your time right here.
You bet, Eric.
He's Lucas Haag, a K-State Research and Extension crop production specialist. Lucas based in Northwest Kansas. And again, he was among those organizing the 23rd Annual Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference this past week in Junction City. And we'll be back with more after these moments away. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Now in our 96th year of service to agriculture, this is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson back with you, and with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. The Trump administration released its new rule defining waters of the United States yesterday, which met with overwhelming approval from the agricultural sector, peeling back from the 2015 rule that the EPA and the Corps of Engineers seek to replace. The Navigable Waters Protection Rule, as it's now called, scraps terms such as significant nexus and spells out 4 specific categories of waterways that will be regulated by the federal government, leaving the oversight for other bodies of water to states and tribes. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Visiting the National Association of Home Builders show in Las Vegas Thursday, the Environmental Protection Agency's administrator announced
the Navigable Waters Protection Rule will establish national consistency and provide greater certainty to states and landowners.
EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler on the final rule that will replace what was known as the waters of the U.S., what he describes as a clearer definition of what constitutes waters of the U.S.
EPA and the Army have clearly defined the difference between federally protected waterways and state protected waterways.
Assistant Secretary of the Army R.D. James at the announcement said,
"This rule also provides room for regional flexibility, taking into account the variations in what constitutes a typical year across the country. In other words, we won't be going out there and assessing a piece of property when it's been raining for 3 months."
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, lending more details under the new rule, the traditional regulated bodies such as territorial seas and major rivers will fall under federal rules, as well as perennial and intermittent tributaries and certain lakes and ponds and impoundments that contribute to the flow of a navigable waterway, along with wetlands adjacent to jurisdictional waters. Now, farm and stock ponds and artificial lakes will not be regulated, nor will prior converted croplands or wetlands that are not near a jurisdictional water body. But the defining legal issue will be the difference between a federally regulated stream and a state or locally regulated stream. Now, an EPA official stated on a press call that this new rule does depend on defining the difference between intermittent streams that flow most of the year and the ephemeral streams that only flow after snow melt or heavy rains. The CEO of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, Barbara Glenn, stated that group is, quoting her, thrilled with the new rule, which Glenn stated would provide certainty to farmers about how their land will be regulated. The American Farm Bureau Federation, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the Fertilizer Institute, the Agricultural Retailers Association, National Association of Wheat Growers, American Soybean Association, National Corn Growers Association, and the National Pork Producers Council also issuing statements praising the administration's actions. Now, noting the new rule does not mean that agriculture will be fully exempt from all water quality regulations, but areas such as groundwater and subsurface drainage are not going to fall under the Clean Water Act now. And the International Grains Council raised its forecast for global grain production in the 2019-20 season in its monthly report yesterday, pointing to higher corn output in the U.S. and in China. The intergovernmental organization said the world would produce 2.17 billion metric tons of grain, 7 million tons more than it forecast in its December report. Driving that increase, a 5 million ton lift to the IGC's forecast for Chinese corn production and a 3 million ton boost to its forecast for the U.S. corn crop. The IGC also raised its forecast for grain demand by 6 million tons to 2.19 billion tons, which would leave the global grain market in a deficit for the third consecutive year. Time now in Agriculture Today to check in on Marcia Boswell. She has this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
Great Plains Analytical Laboratory, Cereal Ingredients, Inc., and their CEO, Robert Hatch, have provided a significant donation to the Kansas Wheat Commission Research Foundation in support of impactful wheat research. The gift will be directed toward ongoing research aimed at developing wheat varieties that result in high-quality baked goods. Hatch is chairman and CEO of Cereal Ingredients, Inc., a specialty food ingredients manufacturer he founded in 1990, and CEO of Great Plains Analytical Laboratory, an analytical laboratory founded as a response to a need in the grain, flour, baking, and food industries for a high level of service response time and expertise. The Kansas Wheat Commission prides itself in directing farmer checkoff dollars to research that results in high-yielding and high-quality wheat varieties. For more than 50 years, the Kansas Wheat Commission has provided funding for K-State wheat breeders. For 8 of the past 10 years, that dollar amount has exceeded $1.1 million. The Kansas Wheat Commission Research Foundation differs from the Wheat Checkoff. While the Checkoff does fund wheat research, it is also used for marketing, promotion, and education. Donations to the Kansas Wheat Commission Research Foundation will be used only for wheat research. Through its Fields Forward fundraising campaign, the Kansas Wheat Commission Research Foundation is raising funds furthering wheat research efforts led by K-State faculty that increase the profitability of farmers while improving the quality of wheat for millers, bakers, and consumers. Recent technological breakthroughs in wheat genetics research will allow us to accelerate delivery of high-value traits to market. In 2017, the reference map of the bread wheat genome was completed by a consortium of international scientists. This new map, in conjunction with emerging technologies like gene editing, will assist in identification and integrations of high-quality end-use traits into new wheat varieties. This gift will be used to help support this research. According to Aaron Harries, the Vice President of Research and Operations for the Kansas Wheat Commission, the team conducting this research includes some of the brightest scientists in the wheat research community. Depending on the discoveries made, this project has the potential to revolutionize the way farmers grow wheat for added value. Ron Supis, chair of the Kansas Wheat Commission Research Foundation, said, "We greatly appreciate this support of the wheat and baking industries by Great Plains Analytical Laboratories, Cereal Ingredients, and Robert Hatch. This wheat research is aimed at developing wheat varieties that result in high-quality baked goods." For more information, visit fieldsforward.org. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia, and this is Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
For you now on Agriculture Today, our weekly glance at Kansas agricultural weather with the good help of our guest, climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension. And you can say with some conviction, Mary, that we're in something of a wet stretch for most of Kansas as of the past several days.
Right. If we look at our week ending on January 21st, which is what we use to feed the information into the U.S. Drought Monitor, statewide we averaged 0.33 of an inch of precip, which was 186% of normal, which sounds like a lot, except when you look at how much that translates to, and that was only 0.16 of an inch. That is more than you want in the eastern two-thirds of the state, which have a lot of moisture coming from the previous seasons, but not much of an impact in western Kansas. And again, when we look at that total, it wasn't evenly distributed. The northwest area of the state missed out. They did get some moisture, averaged 0.07 of an inch of precip, but that's only 71% of normal for the week, so it didn't make much inroads on their situation. Southwest fared a little bit better. They averaged 0.23 of an inch, 1/10 of an inch above what they would normally get. Again, we'll take it, but it isn't going to erase the large deficits that they face out there. They are at about 78% of normal for the year to date. Add 3 days, and looking through yesterday's total, and this doesn't include anything that fell overnight, Statewide, we average 61 hundredths of an inch, and that's a 17 hundredths of an inch surplus, and it's 342% of normal. All divisions were above normal for that time period, including the Northwest. They actually saw a little bit of a surplus on that, about a tenth of an inch. So again, it's been very welcome. The big winner, if you will, on the moisture scale as far as percent of normal were North Central and Central, where they were about 5 times what they would usually see for the week. As far as amounts, East Central averaged 1.18 inches, and that again is about 5 times what they would typically see for the week. So again, some substantial moisture for the last, about 10 days.
But not to overlook, there are those pockets of persistent drought in Kansas.
Right. Again, southwest Kansas in particular is the area that has the largest extent of moderate and severe drought. There is a pocket still in central Kansas, although that's likely to improve with its latest moisture. The moisture in northwest Kansas is more than likely going to slow any further deterioration. They are currently abnormally dry. This will keep them from getting worse. We may be able to get another week without going into moderate drought in that area. We did see a little bit of expansion of the abnormally dry in northwest Kansas. It filled in that northern corner of Cheyenne County and moved over into northeastern Colorado and into southern Nebraska. So again, that did not include this latest moisture, and that's why we saw that deterioration in that area.
And temperatures of late ranged widely, depending on your location, of course. We're accustomed to that here in Kansas.
Right. When we look at it for the departures, again, looking at the week ending Tuesday, before we had our latest plunge of cold air, statewide we averaged about a degree cooler than normal. The southern divisions were on the warmer side, and the warmest was the southeast division because the cold front hadn't moved into that area. Temperature range was a high of 65, numerous locations in southwest Kansas, and a low of 0 in west central Kansas. Add those extra 3 days, and the high dropped down to 62. Again, out in western Kansas, not surprisingly, it's been drier there and it has had less cloud cover, better chance for those temperatures to warm up. It is interesting to note that despite that warmth out in the west central was still slightly below normal. It was about 0.3 of a degree. Northwest fell in right at normal, and southwest was just under 3 degrees warmer than they would typically be for that third week in January.
So, as we look ahead, Mary, you tell us that a repeat may be in store for this coming week.
When you look at the 6 to 10 day outlook, it is calling for a slight chance for warmer conditions, but it is also favoring wetter than normal conditions. We look at the National Weather Service forecast, and there is a chance of moisture Monday and Tuesday. We'll see how that develops and how much coverage we get across the state. But when we stretch it out to the 8 to 14 day outlook, which moves us into that first week of February, we see a little bit of a pattern shift where it's favoring a drier pattern statewide. Temperatures are still strongly favored to be warmer than normal. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean temperatures popping up into the 70s by any stretch. It could very much be just that we don't get down into the teens for our lows, which are still what we would expect at this time of the year. So again, possibility for a warming trend and a drying trend. When we look at the February outlook as a whole, it still slightly favors cooler than normal for most of the state. And on the precipitation side, it's looking equal chances on moisture for all except the eastern edges of the state where there is a slight tendency for dry.
And for those who are fighting muddy conditions. We especially think of those who have cow herds calving now. A bit of a dry out would be very much welcome.
Right, and certainly in the eastern part of the state where we still have full reservoirs, full streams, and full soil moisture profiles, a dry stretch would not be a detriment to getting into the spring season.
Very well. And as always, we appreciate the word, Mary. Many thanks. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp is along with us each Friday, research and extension climatologist here at K-State, and that'll do it for today's edition and for the week. The best to you this weekend, and please rejoin us here on Monday, won't you? Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.